It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome to another podcast by George. Thanks for that outstanding introduction as always. That's John Schaefer, the voice of Channel 5 television. We are Iowa Sports out of the nation's heartland. John Schaefer, great voice, great sports guy, and a great teammate on my men's league hockey team. And I want to mention him all the time. And also can't go by without mentioning the music. The music that you hear all around, beginning and closing most of these podcasts, is the inimitable Bob Pace. And again, the same holds true. Great friend, great musician, and the podcast wouldn't be the same without people like that. So thanks again. Well, today we're going to get back in the jump in the pool for the presidential candidates here running for 2020 across the state of Iowa. And I say pool, I hope you don't think it's the septic. Well, it's not. I mean, these are the Democratic candidates. And really, I gotta mention here right off the top, the guy that we've got today is Michael Bennet. Now, he's a senator from the great state of Colorado that I have a great affinity for. I mean, anybody that's ever been there has got to love the state. Big Head Todd and the Monsters, Todd Parkmore, the lead singer-songwriter from that group, is on this podcast. They're from Colorado, so I love those guys. I just like Colorado, and I like this guy. And you may recall Michael Bennet first kind of got on the national stage when he was taking apart Ted Cruz on the floor of the Senate over Cruz's politicizing and knuckle-dragging when it came to flood relief for his state. I don't know if you remember that. It's on YouTube. Look it up. But that's how folks first became aware of Michael Bennet. And now he's running for president. And the thing that strikes me, to kind of get back to my original point about these presidential candidates, when you see people like, I don't know, for instance, Ted Cruz, or another example, Mike Pence, or the Tuttlehead, Mitch McConnell, people like that, you can look at those people and certainly listen to them, but you can almost just look at them and say, my God, these people are odd. And then you look at these Democratic presidential candidates, and yeah, there's a lot of them, and they get criticized for that, but none of them strike you that way. They're just not odd people. Ted Cruz, I couldn't be more odd. What a strange person he is. And I don't want to be critical about people's looks that much, because I'm not the best looking guy in the world, trust me. But you can look at that guy and know that something isn't quite right. He's out there, folks. He's a little weird, and his politics reflect that. And then you think, well, why can't the Republicans see that? Why did they line up behind these very strange, odd people? And I don't mean just line up behind them. I mean they're dying to support him. Well, the reason is Ted Cruz supports what I call the unholy trinity. The unholy trinity, what is that? Well, it's no abortions, no gun controls, and no taxes. There are people that will vote for that regardless of the candidate, particularly if they think that the opposition might do something to break the unholy trinity. So Ted Cruz, as an example, gets reelected down there in Texas over Beto O'Rourke. Beto, I mean, honest to God, look at the guy. A good-looking young guy, articulate, smart, energetic. I mean, everything that you want in a senatorial candidate. Ted Cruz, this strange person, beats him. Why? Well, because of that. Because Ted Cruz holds the scepter of the unholy trinity, and as long as he does, they'll continue to vote for that guy. Well, let's get back to my original point here, the reason for the podcast. It is introducing Michael Bennet, presidential candidate. Now, a couple of things I like about the guy when he does his presentation. This is in a small coffee shop in Stephen King country. That'll even get mentioned in Madrid, Iowa. Believe it or not, that's Steve King's territory. And he shows up with his beautiful, wonderful family. Again, very normal, simple people. They went and got some ice cream and brought it in. And I don't know, it was just a fuzzy moment, warm and fuzzy moment. And he talked not a long time. His stump speech was only, 10 minutes or so. So let's play that. And then afterwards, we'll play some of the questions that Podcast by George had for him specifically in just for our listeners. So here we go with Michael Bennet, U.S. Senator from Colorado, running for president on the Democratic ticket in 2020.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Tim. Give him a round of applause. And I'm just very grateful that all of you turned out this afternoon. I'm not going to give you a long speech at the outset. I'd much rather spend the time answering whatever questions you have, taking whatever criticisms you have, whatever observations you have. Before I was in this job, I was the school superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, so you cannot hurt my feelings. It has been beaten out of me a long, long time ago. And some of you may know that I've gotten a little bit of a late start here because I had some health issues that I was trying to, and I want to just get that on the table because I don't want people to feel worried about it or thinking about it. But as I was getting ready to announce that I was running, it turned out I had prostate cancer. I went and had a primary care exam, and one thing led to another. And 3 weeks ago today, this is a miracle of modern science, 3 weeks ago today, or yesterday I guess, I was being operated on outside of Denver, and then 3 or 4 days later, they called me and said, "You're clear. You're cancer free. You got a clean bill of health," which is great. But that experience though made me think about two things. One, the disappointment I felt at the beginning of feeling like I wasn't going to have a chance to participate in this great democratic tradition of ours was filled with joy when I discovered that I was able to do it. And the second and more important point is when I was diagnosed. Nobody likes hearing they have cancer, but there was a way to solve this problem, and we did solve the problem. But if I had not been insured, what was a $53,000 surgery would have bankrupted most families in this country. And if I had not had a primary care physician who had said, "You've got a PSA test that doesn't feel right, you need to go out and do this, and you need to go out and do that," we'd be having this conversation. I would have no idea that I had cancer, because I felt fine. And it's just such a reminder to me of our failure as a country. We're wonderful in many respects, but the fact that this is one of the only industrialized countries in the world, in fact, the only industrialized country in the world, where we don't insure everybody and where we don't have primary care medicine for everybody is just crazy. It's just nuts. It's unjust, and we need to find a way to fix it. Second thing I want to mention, because Tim, wherever he went, the chairman, nice enough not to read that whole bio, but if you do have a chance when you go home tonight, go to my website if you can, and I wrote a 14-page kind of letter to everybody here about why I was running for president, what I thought was at stake. And basically the point is that I think we've had 40 years in this country where the economy has grown, but it's grown largely for the people at the very top. And 9 out of 10 Americans have not benefited from that growth. And in a state like my state, Colorado, which actually has one of the most dynamic economies in America, almost everybody I meet can't afford some combination of housing, healthcare, higher education, or early childhood education, or daycare. And as a result of that, they can't really afford a middle-class life, and they can't save, and they can't, predict the future in a way that makes them feel like they're going to be able to secure more opportunity for the next generation in their family, or that somehow their kids are going to be worse off than their parents were, which is the opposite of the American dream. There are some people who say that's just is the way it is. We're in a worldwide market for labor now. Technology's having its impact. China, the rise of China has obviously created some issues, but at least in my state, and I'm sure here, people aren't willing to give up on the idea that the next generation can do better than this one. Because to do that would be to give up on the American dream, and people in my state, and I think across the country, aren't willing to do that. And then the final point I will make is this. Having spent my life outside of politics, in business, and then I was a lawyer first, and then in business, and I was in a room with people, and they said, "Well, you're a lawyer." She said, "I'm a lawyer." And I said, "Oh." And she said, "Well, you were a lawyer too, but you never tell anybody that." I said, "Okay, well, I'll tell people." So I was a lawyer, and then I was in business, and then I was the superintendent of the Denver Public Schools, and I learned a lot in that last job about our country, and inequities that exist in this country when it comes to the delivery of education, especially for kids living in poverty, and what that means for themselves and for their families. In the last 10 years, I've been in the Senate, and there are a number of ways that I've worked in a bipartisan way to create results for the country, including rewriting No Child Left Behind with Lamar Alexander, who's the Republican chair of the Education Committee, working as a member of the Gang of Eight in 2013, 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans. Make sure this isn't my kid's. Actually, this is my kid that's in college. I'm going to turn it off. She's supposed to be studying for exams. Where was I? Gang of Eight. 4 Democrats and 4 Republicans who sat there for 8 months negotiating a really hard piece of legislation. But the American people would have been proud to see how that all came down, and it got 68 votes on the floor, or making sure new drugs are available to pediatric cancer patients or to patients with special needs. I've learned, how to get stuff done back there, but I've also learned a lot about why nothing important ever gets done back there. And a big piece of that is because of the Freedom Caucus, and I've been in Steve King's territory today. These people, I'm still I can't get out. I can't get out. But it's funny that his name is that, because these guys go under the moniker Freedom Caucus, the name Freedom Caucus. It's an ironic name because these people have been absolute tyrants over the last 10 years. They believe that they have a monopoly on wisdom. They believe that there's only one way to be American. They believe there's only one way to look American. They believe there's only one way to think that's American. And the whole point of our founding was that not that we would have agreements, but that we would have disagreements. That was the great thing about living in a democracy, or a democratic republic, or a republic as our founders called it. We would have disagreements. Their optimism was that out of those disagreements, we would furnish more durable and more imaginative solutions than any king, whether it's Steve King or, the King of England, right, George, could do on their own. That was the theory of action. And that part of what we do in Washington has been largely disabled by politicians who are responding to what's going on Twitter or the cable television at night, special interests, and massive amounts of money pouring into the system from billionaires. All of which is to say it's important that we're here today, because these are things that need to be corrected. They cannot be left alone. The Freedom Caucus and their allies have done a very good job of separating the American people from the mechanisms that are our means of self-government. And it is my view, putting aside Donald Trump for a moment, that if we continue to perpetuate the politics of the last 10 years as a society, we will become more unfair, our democracy will become weaker, and our ability to deliver for the next generation will be even more constrained than it is today. So I think it's really important in this election cycle that we don't just beat Donald Trump, which is a very essential task ahead of all of us, but it's also that we restore our ability to govern. And some people say that's naive. I think what's naive is believing that if we don't restore our ability to govern, that the next generation is going to remember us very well. It's not beyond our means to close over this empty partisanship that exists in Washington. It is not beyond our means to beat the special interests and to change the way big money plays in our politics. It is within our means, as it has been for 230 years of Americans who have fought to make this country more fair, more democratic, and more just. And that's what we have to do. And it's hard. It is not easy. And it's impossible to do between the commercial breaks on the cable television at night. When it comes to Trump, I guess I'd say this. I think he's very much more a symptom of our problems than the central cause of our problems. He has made matters back there much worse. And when I'm at home, I represent a state that's a third Republican, a third Democratic, and a third Independent. It's rural, it's urban, it's got everything. And it's a state I love to represent because I just go all over the place having town halls just like this one in red parts of the state or blue parts of the state. It doesn't matter to me with the Republicans and with Democrats. And all the confidence I need in our democracy occurs in those town halls, if we can figure out how to get leadership that pulls us together again rather than dividing us over lines that are not of particular interest to the people that work for us or that we work for. And when I ask people, why'd you vote for Donald Trump, who lost my state by 4 points, by the way, they say, well, we wanted to blow the place up. And I say, congratulations, you succeeded, because it was screwed up before he got there, and it's even worse than it was when he got there. And now the question is, what are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? And he has been a malevolent force in our political system. I think he's an aberrant force in our political system. But there are those people who think that the answer to this is just to continue to degrade our political conversation, to continue to degrade our institutions, and I really disagree with that. You know, every day I go to work, I think about the kids that I used to work for in the Denver Public School, the kids all over Colorado, the kids all over Iowa, who are expecting us to live up to the standard that's been set by the people that came before us in this country. We're staring into the abyss right now, and this is our opportunity not just to get out of the abyss, but to govern in a way that will make us proud and make the next generation of Americans proud. There they come with their ice cream cones, my own kid. So that's all I had for all of you. You're wonderful to let me spend some time with you. Again, I would love to take any question, any criticism, anything that you've got, anything. I'd love to stop talking for a second, too, so I can get a breath. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Kate Zimmerman.
And if you don't mind, Kate Zimmerman,
Yes.
I'm going to drink this
Go
while we're talking.
No, wouldn't dream of stopping
Let
you.
me introduce, by the way, this is my wife, Susan Daggett, right there. And 2 or 3 of our kids. This is Helena Bennet, who just is graduating from high school and going to college next year, and Ann Bennet, who is 14 and sort of runs the show. Thank you. No, it's nice to meet you.
Okay, so there you go. Like a lot of the Democratic candidates, very even, very measured, very intelligent. I mean, the guy is nothing but real. No crazy train like the Republican stuff. And the other thing that struck me about this, he's one of those very pragmatic candidates on the Democratic side. I don't know where he falls on the political spectrum, maybe kind of towards the liberal side. Not super progressive because he still wants to, work with the way things are. And really that's a big difference between his approach and the approach of like Bernie Sanders as far as a presentation is concerned. Bernie's talking revolution. He's going to overthrow everything and we're going to rise up and take this country back, and it's going to be like it's never been before, and all this is going to happen as soon as Bernie gets elected, and he wants us to join with him, and we're going to do this. It always reminds me, to digress a little bit, remember the Alice Cooper song back in the 70s, Elected? Check it out on YouTube if you haven't, but we're going to take the country by storm. We want to be elected. I mean, it's kind of like that. When you go and see Bernie and his followers, and God love them. I mean, yeah, I get that. But this guy, Bennett, is exactly the other way on that issue. His approach is, this is going to be hard. This is going to be difficult. It's probably not going to be overnight. It is going to take all of us together, and we're in a deep, dark hole here. We got to crawl out of this pit. We're not going to jump out. We're gonna have to fight and claw our way free of this thing, because those nut jobs that are in that Freedom Caucus that he's talking, they're still there, and they're going to be there. Maybe they'll be weakened a little bit, but they're on the job, folks. And he wants you to know that he's going to work hard. He's going to do what he can, but it's not going to happen that quickly. All right, let's get to the interview here. And I start off by mentioning the Ted Cruz video, and then talk a little bit about that plague of flooding out on the Missouri River, which has been prominent, just been devastating all spring. So here we go with the little press gaggle with the lead by Podcast by George. Yeah, so I was struck by the, the fact that you kind of leapt into the national consciousness with that Cruz video. And your frustration was born out of the fact that your state was underwater. You were flooded. And, of course, western Iowa still is suffering mightily from the recent flooding. So do you see any comparisons or contrast to the circumstances? And do you have an update on what's going on out there?
We've got it. First of all, I have incredible amounts of sympathy for what people are going through in western Iowa. Our massive floods were in 2013. People don't really think, we have obviously very different rivers than you guys have here. The flooding is very different. But in our state, when all that water fell and the water was forced down those ravines, dragging all the topsoil, all the rock, and then getting to the eastern plains, it was washing out everybody along the way. And we were going through all of that when the federal government was shut down. And people on the ground, just like what's happening in western Iowa today, are working with their local elected officials, working with their state officials, working with their state agencies and their local agencies and their nonprofits, and people from around the world who are coming to help to do the work that needs to be done, not just to recover, but to build it back better than it was. And meanwhile, we can't pass a bill in the Congress right now. It's different from a shutdown, but still, you're not getting the aid you should be getting because of politics that has nothing to do with Iowa. And my hope for it is that as these days wear on, we will finally come to a point where we can reach an agreement and we can get a bill passed. And that is my expectation that we're going to be able to do that too. And an equally important point is the standard of the sort of the level of accountability we hold our local elected officials to should be exactly the level of accountability we hold our national elected officials to. If we held them to the same standard, they'd stop doing this. If somebody in western Iowa who has responsibility for dealing with the floods behaved the way the people in D.C. did, they wouldn't be able to go to the grocery store on Saturday. They wouldn't be able to go to the post office and mail a letter because people would say, what in the world is wrong with you people? And somehow we got to extend that accountability there.
Oh, that's great.
All right.
Yeah, our rivers are different, our flooding circumstances are different, but the political landscape in our two states is somewhat similar. Colorado's got this blue urban, got a red agriculture. Yep. Iowa's got the same thing. How do you overcome that divide?
Well, I think, in Colorado is a state that's a third Republican, a third Democratic, and a third Independent. I spend a lot of time in red parts of the state where I may never get more than 30% or 35% of the vote, because I think that's my obligation as a senator for everybody, and whether people vote for me or not. Fortunately for me, I've been on the Ag Committee for 10 years, so that's taken me to rural Colorado. We've forged relationships. We've worked together on things as diverse as the Farm Bill on the one hand, to believe it or not, immigration on the other. We created something called the Colorado Compact that became the basis of my work in Washington on immigration, and the first signatories on that compact were very conservative counties in Colorado that know that their families' livelihoods depend on our figuring out how to solve that issue. So that issue is different in Iowa, and I understand that, but in my judgment, there is a 70% consensus in this country for what to do about infrastructure, what to do about higher education, what to do about K-12, what to do about trade, what to do about the economy. And if we could just figure out how to overcome the political divisions in Washington, not the ones here, we could make progress. And in the end, that's what we're going to have to do, because it's the only way we will make progress. There is no other way. The idea was never that we would all agree with each other. That was not the idea. The idea was that we would disagree with each other, but find more imaginative solutions than any king or tyrant would ever find on their own.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, king or tyrant? Well, when he says that, make no mistake who he's talking about. That would be the Donald. Although I'm not totally opposed to another king for the United States of America. The last one we had was King George. Yeah, and that kind of has a nice ring to it. Maybe, probably not. Well, anyway, that's going to wrap it up. That's another podcast. That's Michael Bennet, U.S. Senator from Colorado, another one of the outstanding Democrat, and there's a bunch of them, running for president in 2020. Thanks for listening to us. Don't forget, we're everywhere. You can get us on Facebook, which most people do, but we're also available on YouTube, and we're out there on Spotify and Google Play and Yeah, every place that Twitter, sign up for our Twitter feed. Every place that podcasts are available that, I can think of, you can get Podcast by George. So do it, please. But for right now, that is another podcast by George.